I think most of you probably know the UN for its innovation in bureaucracy. We actually wrote the book on it. But the good news is we are changing. In fact, I can take you back to at least a decade when the then Secretary General Kofi Annan came in with the idea of reform. The whole idea was that we cannot do things on our own. We must work together. We must reach out to the private sector, civil society, and individual philanthropists and foundations so that if we can benefit from expertise from people like yourselves, we actually can make a difference. And the good news is the entire UN family is starting to change. Way back in 1997, Ted Turner came to see Kofi Annan that time. It was September, I remember distinctly that day. He was due to receive an award for, I think it was international engagement. So he came to Kofi Annan and he said, Kofi, I checked my balance sheet. At the beginning of this year, 1997, I was worth $3 billion. Now I'm worth $4. And that, frankly, that additional $1 billion doesn't make that much of a difference to me. So I want to give that to you. I know my government hasn't paid its dues, so I'll give you that dues, and I'll sue the US government. So Kofi Annan nearly fell off his chair. Actually, he asked him 3 times, 1 million? And Ted would say, 1 billion. And we'd say, I'm sure it's not 1 billion he's talking about. In the end, we settled on that 1 billion. And he said, look, I cannot take that money from you. This is subrogation of sovereign debt, and there is no arrangement for us to do that. So he went back. He was due to receive that award the next day. And that's how he described it. He kind of said, saved $1 billion, actually. Got up the next morning, he said, no, I want to do this. So we then said, look, why don't you create a foundation which can spend funds for humanitarian causes. And we will create another structure at the United Nations to help advise you and channel those resources. And at the same time, the understanding would be that you help us bring other partners. So we agreed to do that. He committed $1 billion. To date, he has spent $650+ million. And the real story, which often doesn't get told, is that as a result of his arrival on the scene, we've now generated another $560 million from other partners. Now, that's just a quantified element of that relationship. The unquantified element is immense because there are so many people out there who are doing things. They started coming to us and saying, hey, I didn't know the UN worked with the private sector. I didn't know the UN worked with civil society. And sure enough, excuse me, there was a real interest in engaging, in working together. That actually helped change the way the UN did business, because traditionally we work with governments. We follow what the government's requirements are, we implement those projects or programs, we advise them on strategy, etc. Now we have a tripartite arrangement, and we probably work with thousands of private sector companies, civil society organizations. We have now on our books 8,500 accredited NGOs. In 1997, we had 1,500. And these are registered NGOs under the Economic and Social Council umbrella. So we've seen an exponential increase in that arrangement. And I'm very pleased to say that within the entire UN family, so UNICEF, UNDP, World Health Organization, each of them have now set up a private sector focal point function. We work with a number of bilateral agencies, including, delighted to say, USAID is a strong partner. The State Department, 3 years ago, set up a Global Partnership Center, and which we work together with them on it. USAID has had a tradition of working with private sector partners and civil society organizations, and we've benefited with that kind of engagement. So maybe I should stop here. And
I mean, you've talked about the change in the relationships and the new partners. Can you give us an example of something that's changed in terms of outcomes because of these new partnerships?
So I could give you several examples, but one which we could probably relate to a little bit better is what Coca-Cola is doing. Coca-Cola is, its main product, if you like, is water-based. So they're the biggest, quote, consumers of water, procurers of water. So they've set up an alliance on water in terms of how to make safe drinking water available to the poor. Now, they see it as a business model, because at the end of the day, if they can create an environment where the poor can have access to safe drinking water, they'll be healthy, they'll be educated better, and actually they'll buy their Coca-Cola or other beverages. Another thing we did with Coca-Cola was we used their distribution network in Africa to distribute condoms and literature regarding HIV/AIDS for prevention. It was quite clear that Coca-Cola, which is the biggest employer in Africa, for every 2 people they needed to employ, they recruited 3, because 1 out of that 3 would die in the ensuing 3 years out of HIV/AIDS. This is, I'm taking you back to about 2000, 2001. They, as a result of these practices of distributing literature and better training of the factory workers and the bottling plants, and they worked with the UN, the UN Office for HIV and AIDS based out of Geneva. And we helped them build that relationship. And that's starting to make a huge difference now. And they're getting engaged in other things as well.